The mirror in Emma Chen's bedroom reflected a woman who had learned to wear confidence like armor. The emerald silk dress clung to her with quiet elegance, its deep green catching the soft lamplight as she smoothed it over her hips. Her hair was perfectly coiled into a low chignon, and her makeup was precise, the practiced hand of someone who had long ago learned that presentation was part of the job. At 29, she had carved her place in one of New York's most competitive industries, clawing her way to the position of marketing director at Pinnacle Advertising. But tonight was more than another evening of handshakes and champagne flutes. Tonight was the annual Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala, an event where the city's most influential names gathered in a glittering display of wealth and networking power. It was the kind of night where careers could change in a single conversation. And if she played her cards right, it could finally be the night she stepped out of middle management and into a partner's role. Her phone buzzed for the third time in as many minutes. Richard Hampton, her boss, had sent another reminder. "Emma, remember? The Hartwell Foundation is deciding on a multi-million-dollar campaign. Impress them." His words were polite enough, but the undertone was clear. Come prepared, come polished, and most importantly, come with the right company. The problem was, Emma's love life was non-existent. Between 12-hour workdays, endless client dinners, and the constant push to stay ahead in an industry that never slept, dating had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Her last relationship had crumbled under the weight of her ambition, and she hadn't risked another since. For months, her evenings had been spent alone in her apartment, eating takeout over marketing briefs. 3 nights ago, she'd made a decision that still sat uneasily in her chest. In a moment of quiet panic, she'd called Elite Companions, a discreet agency she had heard about from a former colleague with too much wine in her system. She had been painfully clear in her request: someone educated, articulate, able to discuss current events and business strategy without a single hint of awkwardness. Someone who could blend into a room filled with CEOs, venture capitalists, and society patrons. "We have just the gentleman for you," Mrs. Patterson, the agency coordinator, had said with crisp confidence. "Michael Torres. He's experienced, charming, and understands the pace of corporate events." The arrangement had been set in minutes. Michael would arrive at her apartment an hour before the gala so they could go over the details of their story, where they'd met, how long they'd been together, the sort of things people at these functions always asked. Emma had rehearsed her lines the way she might rehearse a pitch, determined that not even Richard could suspect this was anything but a real relationship. Still, as she adjusted the diamond clasp on her bracelet and caught her own gaze in the mirror, a flicker of loneliness passed through her. She had built a life surrounded by people, yet somehow it always felt as if she were standing at the center of a crowded room, unseen. Tonight was no different. The dress, the hair, the flawless makeup, all of it was armor, covering the simple truth that she would rather have someone beside her for who she was, not for the image she projected. The clock on her dresser ticked towards 7. In a few minutes, Michael would ring her doorbell, and she would step into the ballroom on his arm, smiling like she belonged there. The performance would be perfect, she told herself. It had to be. And yet, as she took one last look in the mirror, she couldn't shake the whisper of a thought that she was about to step into an evening that would unravel her carefully ordered life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The doorbell rang with the precision of a clock striking the hour, and Emma's pulse leapt before she could stop it. She had rehearsed this moment in her head, imagining a man who matched Mrs. Patterson's description, exactly tall but not intimidatingly so handsome in a polished way. Easy smile, the kind that could charm her boss and every potential client they met tonight. But when she opened the door, the image in her mind shattered completely. The man standing in the hallway was not Michael Torres. He was taller, broader, his frame filling the space effortlessly, as if the air bent around him. His hair was dark with a slight wave, and his eyes were the kind of gray that seemed to shift with the light, sharp yet unreadable. His black tuxedo fit with the ease of someone who wore one often, not rented, not borrowed, but owned, tailored to perfection. The faintest scent of something rich and clean trailed in with him. "You must be Emma," he said, his voice low, smooth, carrying a quiet authority that made her forget to speak for a second. "I apologize for the change. Michael had a family emergency. I will be taking his place tonight. My name is David." Emma's fingers tightened on the doorframe. This was wrong. She had chosen Michael for a reason. She didn't know this man, and she certainly didn't trust last-minute surprises. Not when her entire career could hinge on how this evening unfolded. I specifically requested Michael. She said each word precise. This is an important night. I don't know anything about you. David's smile was warm, but something in it carried a flicker of mystery. Mrs. Patterson briefed me about your evening, your goals, the impression you need to make. I assure you, I am more than capable. His confidence was unsettling, not because it was loud, but because it was calm, measured, the kind of self-assurance that did not need to be proven. She should have told him to leave to send someone else. But the clock was already against her, and the gala started in less than an hour. Come in, she said, finally stepping aside. We need to go over our story. David entered with a slow glance around her apartment, his gaze catching on the art pieces she had chosen with care. This is an impressive space, he remarked. You have excellent taste. Emma ignored the slight rush of pleasure that bloomed at the compliment and moved straight to business. We've been dating for 3 months. We met at a bookstore in Soho. You work in consulting, which explains why you travel frequently and are not always available for company events. David nodded, but then asked, What kind of books were you buying when we met? Emma blinked. Most people would simply memorize the facts. He seemed intent on making them real business strategy books. I was researching international market expansion. I was in the philosophy section. He said, looking directly at her, Marcus Aurelius specifically. We started talking about applying Stoic principles to leadership in modern business. It was oddly specific, too. Specific. The detail settled into her mind like a pebble in water rippling outward. She studied him, wondering if he was rehearsing a role or if he genuinely believed it. We should save philosophy for the car, he added, glancing at his watch. We do not want to be late. Emma followed him out, her heels clicking against the marble hallway floor, and for reasons she could not explain, she had the sudden chilling thought that she was walking into a night she would not forget for the rest of her life. The Mandarin Oriental's ballroom shimmered like a dream made of gold and crystal, the light from towering chandeliers spilling over gowns worth small fortunes and tuxedos cut to perfection. The air was thick with perfume and the low hum of conversations that carried more power than any boardroom Emma had ever stepped into. She felt David beside her like a wall of steady calm, as if his presence alone pushed back the sharp glances and whispered assessments that followed her when she walked into spaces like this. Richard Hampton, her boss, spotted them instantly, his wife in tow, eyes glancing over David with a curiosity that bordered on scrutiny. Emma, darling, you look radiant, Richard said, his gaze sliding toward David. And who is this? David stepped forward with the precision of a man who had been introduced to thousands of powerful people and never once been caught off guard. Richard, pleasure to meet you. Emma has told me about the incredible work you are doing with the Hartwell Foundation. His handshake was firm, his eye contact unwavering. Oh, you are familiar with our work? Richard asked, raising a brow. Environmental sustainability marketing fascinates me, David replied smoothly. The challenge of making conservation profitable requires creativity and strategy few are willing to attempt. Emma watched the subtle shift in Richard's demeanor, the approval he rarely gave so quickly. David did not just hold his own in this arena, he commanded it with an ease that should have taken years to master. She began introducing him to other guests, and each time David adapted effortlessly to the conversation, remembering names, asking insightful questions, weaving himself into the fabric of the evening as if he had been born to it. Dinner was served at a table near the center of the room, surrounded by board members and donors who spoke in measured tones about legacy projects and market expansion. David Lee steamed intently, and when he spoke, it was with the kind of layered intelligence that made people lean closer. He did not sound like a man who worked gig to gig through an escort agency. He sounded like someone who had sat at far larger tables. Between courses, Emma caught herself studying him, the way his hand rested on the table, relaxed but never careless, the way his gaze seemed to take in every detail of the room without moving much at all. He had an awareness she could not place, and it stirred something between curiosity and caution. When the orchestra began playing, David turned to her. May I have this dance? The moment they stepped onto the floor, his hand slid to the small of her back, guiding her with quiet certainty. The music swelled around them, but the world seemed to narrow to the rhythm of their steps and the sound of his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You do not need to be nervous tonight," he said. "You belong here more than most of them." Her chest tightened at the sincerity in his tone. For a fleeting second, she forgot every reason she should keep her guard up. Then just over his shoulder, she saw her assistant weaving through the crowd, excitement flashing in her eyes. "Emma James Alexander is here." She said it like she was announcing the arrival of royalty. David's jaw tightened just enough for her to notice before his expression smoothed into something unreadable. "And who is James Alexander?" he asked. "One of the youngest billionaire CEOs in the country," her assistant gushed. "Some call him the ghost of Silicon Valley." Emma looked back at David, and in that moment she was certain something in him had shifted. The music played on, but she could feel the temperature of the night change without a single word being spoken. The dance ended, but David's hand lingered at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. His eyes locked on hers with a warmth that felt dangerously real. The crowd around them blurred into a swirl of sequins and champagne flutes, but Emma could feel the unspoken shift in the air. Her assistant's words about James Alexander still echoed in her mind, and she could not shake the memory of that flicker across David's face. They stepped off the dance floor, but David's gaze seemed to track the room as if searching for someone or perhaps avoiding someone. Emma followed his line of sight, but saw only the usual parade of high society guests, all perfectly polished and carefully calculating. Every detail of David's composure was still intact, but it was too intact as if he were holding something in place. Richard appeared again, introducing them to a pair of venture capitalists with deep ties to the Hartwell Foundation. David engaged easily, yet Emma noticed how his answers became sharper, more economical. His charm was still there, but it felt measured now, almost guarded. Between conversations, Emma leaned in. "Tell me the truth. Do you know James Alexander?" David's eyes flicked to hers, his smile steady, yet his voice a shade lower than before. "I know of him. We have moved in similar circles on occasion." That was all he offered before turning to greet another guest, leaving Emma with a strange, hollow feeling as though he had given her an answer that meant nothing at all. She forced herself to focus on the purpose of the evening, but the question gnawed at her. An hour later, while David stepped away to take another phone call, Emma wandered toward the balcony for a breath of fresh air. The city sprawled out beneath her, glittering and restless. She was about to turn back when movement caught her eye. Inside the ballroom near the entrance, a man stood flanked by 2 security guards. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the kind of understated authority that drew attention without demanding it. The crowd seemed to part around him. She didn't need anyone to tell her. That had to be James Alexander. Even from across the room, she could see the intensity in his gaze as he surveyed the event like a chessboard in motion. And then she saw David re-enter the room, phone still in hand. His steps faltered for the briefest second when his eyes met the man's across the crowd. It was nothing more than a flicker, but it was enough to send a prickle down her spine. James Alexander's expression didn't change, but Emma swore there was recognition there. Not casual recognition, but something deeper, older, the kind built from shared history. The moment passed quickly. David crossed the room toward her with his easy smile back in place. "Shall we make the rounds again?" he asked, as if nothing had happened. Emma nodded, but her mind was already racing. The evening had been meant to prove her worth to the right people, but now she couldn't stop thinking about the 2 men and the silent thread that seemed to connect them. She had the unsettling sense that the gala was no longer about her career at all, but about a story she had stepped into without realizing, and one that might change everything. The morning light spilled across Emma's bedroom in thin golden lines, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to lie still, eyes closed, listening to the faint hum of the city far below. Then the scent of fresh coffee drifted in, and the memories of the night before returned in vivid fragments. The music, the careful way David had guided her through the crowd, the unshakable feeling that something about him did not add up. She slipped out of bed, wrapping her robe around her, and followed the aroma to the kitchen. David stood there in tuxedo pants and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up as he poured steaming coffee into 2 mugs. The sight was disarming, almost domestic, like this was something they had done 100 times before. He looked up with a smile as if nothing in the world was out of place. "Morning. I hope you like it the way I made it." Emma accepted the mug and noticed it was exactly how she took it. No sugar, just a splash of cream. She had never told him that. The small detail tightened the knot of questions already in her chest. They sat at the breakfast bar sharing croissants that he admitted he had picked up from a French bakery down the street somehow in the early hours. His manner was relaxed, but beneath it, there was an energy, a quiet vigilance that made it impossible for her to believe he was simply an escort filling in for the evening. His phone rang, breaking the stillness. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted in an instant. The warmth drained away, replaced by sharp focus. He excused himself, stepping out onto the balcony. Emma could see him through the glass, pacing as he spoke. The tone of his voice was different from the smooth charm he had shown at the gala. This was clipped, decisive, commanding. She caught fragments: merger terms, board approvals, market volatility. Each word slid into place in her mind, forming a picture that did not fit the story she had been told. When he returned, his smile was back, but thinner, as if it had been placed there for her benefit. "I may have to cut this morning short," he said. "Something has come up at work." Emma kept her voice even. "Consulting emergencies sound intense." David paused as though considering how much to say. "About my work," he began, but the phone rang again. This time the conversation was louder and she heard more: stock fluctuations, investor confidence, timing of the announcement. None of it sounded like the work of a man who earned his living attending social events as a companion. After he left with a promise to call her later, Emma tried to lose herself in work, but the questions kept circling. The easy way he navigated the gala, the knowledge in his conversations, the way he carried himself like someone used to commanding rooms. She had seen men like that before, but they were never paid by the hour. By mid-afternoon, curiosity had shifted into something sharper. She opened her laptop and began searching, starting with elite companions. Nothing useful, just curated images and vague descriptions. Then she tried David's name in every variation she could think of. Nothing. No photos, no company profiles, no trace. It was as if he did not exist at all, and that was the most unsettling detail of all. By late afternoon, Emma's focus had dissolved into restless energy. She moved from her desk to the window to the kitchen and back again, each time telling herself she was overthinking, and each time finding her mind pulled straight back to David's voice on the balcony, the cold precision in his tone, the words that belonged in the mouths of CEOs, not hired escorts. She was flipping through the business cards she had collected at the gala when her fingers stopped on one: Catherine Hartwell, president of the Hartwell Foundation. On impulse, she dialed Catherine's number, intending only to thank her for the evening. "Emma, dear." Catherine's warm voice came through at once. "I was hoping to hear from you. We were all so impressed with you last night and with your young man." Emma's pulse quickened. "Yes, David was very helpful. He made a wonderful impression." "Indeed," Catherine agreed. "My husband kept saying he recognized him, but he could not place where. At first I thought he was imagining things, but then halfway home it struck him. He had seen David's face in Forbes magazine in an article about young entrepreneurs." Emma gripped the phone tighter. Her heart was beginning to pound. "Are you sure? Quite sure?" Catherine said cheerfully. Of course it could not be the same person. That man was a tech mogul worth billions, but the resemblance was remarkable. His name was James Alexander, CEO of Technova Industries. "Does that ring a bell?" Emma's breath caught. Her free hand went to her forehead as if steadying herself. The name rang more than a bell. It set off an alarm. After the call, she opened her laptop again, this time typing James Alexander into the search bar. The first image that appeared made her sit back hard in her chair. The suit, the jawline, the storm, gray eyes. There was no mistaking him. David and James Alexander were the same man. Article after article painted the same picture: a self-made billionaire who had taken over his father's tech empire at 25. A man known for his relentless privacy, rarely photographed, rarely seen at social events. The nickname Ghost of Silicon Valley appeared more than once. Each detail clashed violently with the story she had been told about a last-minute escort filling in for a colleague. She read about his net worth, about properties scattered across continents, about the patents and innovations that had made him one of the most influential figures in the industry. And then she thought about the way he had asked her what books she had been reading, the way he had guided her through the ballroom as if he had walked in those circles his whole life, because he had. Her phone buzzed on the desk, a text from him. "Can we meet? I have something important to tell you." Emma stared at the words for a long time. Her thoughts, a tangled knot of betrayal, curiosity, and an ache she did not want to admit, was hope. She typed back, "My apartment 1 hour." The next 60 minutes dragged and raced all at once. Every sound from the hallway made her head turn. Every shadow in the room felt heavier. She kept asking herself the same question. What kind of man hides his identity behind another name, and what would he possibly want from her now? When the knock came, it was softer than she expected, yet it seemed to echo through the apartment. Emma opened the door, and there he was. No tuxedo now, just dark jeans and a tailored jacket, expensive without trying to be. His posture was as confident as ever, but his eyes were different, sharper and more uncertain at the same time. Emma stepped back to let him in, watching how he scanned the room once before meeting her gaze. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes, we do." "James?" she replied, letting the name land between them. He froze for half a breath, the mask slipping just enough to show surprise. "You know, I know you are. James Alexander, CEO of Technova Industries. I know you were not an escort last night. I know you let me walk into that ballroom with a lie on my arm." His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I was not supposed to be there," he began. "I had a meeting in the hotel with investors. It ended early, and I was avoiding photographers. I was walking through the lobby when you approached me, thinking I was your escort. I should have told you the truth, but I didn't." "Why?" she asked sharply. "Because you didn't know my name," he said. "And you looked at me like I was just a man, not a headline, not a bank account. Do you have any idea what that felt like after years of being treated like a prize instead of a person?" Emma crossed her arms. "That is not an excuse. You lied to me, and you kept lying even after we connected, even after you knew who I was." His voice dropped low. "I wanted to keep the one genuine night I had found. I was afraid that the second you knew everything would change, and you think so little of me that you believed I would care only about your money." "No," he said quickly, "but I have seen it happen more times than I can count. People who seemed real until they saw the lifestyle, and then suddenly everything became about that I was protecting what we had, protecting myself." She almost laughed, "Thou." "Geech." There was no humor in it. "Protecting yourself by deceiving me. That is a strange kind of honesty." He stepped closer until there was only a breath between them. "I am telling you the truth now when I have every reason to keep hiding. I am risking the only connection that has felt real in years. Emma, I am falling for you. Not for your image, or what you can do for me, but for you." She wanted to push him away, wanted to hold on to her anger, but the way he said it made her chest tighten. She searched his face for a crack, for some sign that this was another performance, and found only raw sincerity. "One dinner," she said finally. "If we are going to talk again, it has to be the truth from now on. No more lies." Relief flooded his features. "No more lies," he promised. "Just us finding out if what we started can survive the truth." The next evening, Emma stood in front of her closet for what felt like the 100th time. Every dress seemed wrong too. Formal felt like armor, too casual felt like a dismissal. In the end, she chose a simple black dress that moved with her body and made her feel grounded, not a costume for a role, but something that belonged to her. At exactly 7, there was a knock. James stood there in a dark coat over a crisp shirt. No flash, no theatrics. Just him and a car waiting at the curb. Not the sleek sports car she had half expected, but a modest black sedan that looked almost ordinary. "Where are we going?" she asked as he opened the door for her. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can talk without an audience," he said. They drove out of Manhattan until the skyline softened behind them and stopped in front of a small Italian restaurant tucked between a bakery and an old bookstore. The warm yellow light spilling from its windows felt worlds away from the glitter of the gala. James greeted the elderly owner Yeppe like an old friend receiving a clap on the shoulder and a grin before they were shown to a corner table. Over bowls of pasta and glasses of wine, the conversation shifted from polite to personal. James spoke of his father's sudden death, the crushing responsibility of inheriting a company before he felt ready, the mistakes he made in those first brutal years, and the walls he had built to keep people out. He admitted how easy it had become to let money decide who could get close because it was safer than risking disappointment. Emma listened quietly, but when he paused, she asked the question that had been burning since the night before. "You still lied to me. You could have told me the truth once you saw I wasn't here for your bank account." His gaze dropped for a moment. "I was afraid telling you would end it. I convinced myself the lie was protecting both of us. Protecting us from what? From the chaos that comes with my life. The media, the pressure, the way people change when they know who I am." Before she could reply, a sudden burst of light caught her eye. Through the restaurant window, a man stood across the street, camera raised, snapping photos, one after another, the flash cutting through the dark like shards of glass. James saw it too. His expression hardened. "Stay here," he murmured, but the photographer had already crossed the street, calling out, "James Alexander, who is she? How long have you been together? Is she moving in?" Emma's chest tightened. The warm little world they had created over dinner shattered in seconds. James's hand found hers, firm but gentle, as he steered her toward the door. The ride back was quiet, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on both of them. When they stopped outside her building, James turned to her. "This is what I was trying to protect you from. If you stay with me, this will happen again." Emma held his gaze, her heartbeat uneven. "I know," she said, but her voice trembled from more than just the cold. She was beginning to realize the choice ahead of her was not just about trusting him, but about whether she was ready to step into his world and everything that came with it. Emma barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the camera flashes returned the shouts of the photographer echoing in her ears. By morning, the headlines had already begun to appear on gossip sites. "Billionaire's mystery dinner date. Who is the woman with James Alexander?" Her photo was everywhere. She sat at her kitchen table scrolling through the articles. Her name had not been printed yet, but it was only a matter of time. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, friends, even her assistant who had sent a frantic text. "Emma, this is all over the internet." She wanted to be angry, furious even. But underneath the shock, there was a strange clarity. She had stepped into this willingly. Whether it lasted or not, she could not pretend it was just a dinner anymore. By the afternoon, James called. His voice was careful, measured. "I can have my legal team take the photos down. We can shut most of it down before it spreads further." "No," she said, surprising herself. "If this is going to happen, I want to face it head on. I will not hide behind lawyers and PR teams. If people are going to talk, they can talk, but it will be on my terms." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "You really are something, Emma. You know that." That night, they met again at his apartment, a sprawling penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that seemed endless. But she was not distracted by the luxury. Instead, she walked straight to him and said, "If we are doing this, we are equals. I have my own career, my own goals. I will not be your accessory." He smiled, the kind of smile that started slow and reached his eyes. "That is exactly why I want you in my life." Over the next 3 months, Emma learned what it meant to date a man like James. There were dinners where her name was whispered as she passed tables, charity events where every glance felt like a calculation, and moments when strangers treated her like an object in a story they thought they understood. But there were also nights on his couch eating takeout mornings, walking through Central Park unnoticed, and long conversations where he listened to her ideas as if they were the most important in the world. Her career thrived in unexpected ways. Clients she had once struggled to reach sought her out, not because of James's name, but because of the work she had done and the confidence she now carried. Richard offered her the partnership she had been chasing for years, and yet even with success building around her, she knew the public glare would never fade entirely. Every step forward would be in full view, and every misstep magnified. Still, when she looked at James across a table or caught the unguarded way he watched her speak, she felt certain she had chosen the fire, knowing exactly how hot it could burn. The evening of the Hartwell campaign launch shimmered with the kind of energy Emma had only dreamed about months earlier. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation, every seat filled with business leaders, philanthropists, and media waiting to hear her speak. Backstage, she adjusted the microphone clipped to her blazer, her heart beating fast, not with fear, but with something sharper and steadier. From the wings, she caught sight of James in the third row. His expression was unguarded, full of pride. Beside him sat Richard Hampton and Catherine Hartwell, both smiling, as if they had been part of this journey from the beginning. The lights dimmed and her name was called. Emma walked onto the stage, and for the next 40 minutes, she spoke with the clarity and conviction of someone who had fought for every inch she had gained. She unveiled the campaign strategy showing how sustainability could be transformed from a moral obligation into a lifestyle people aspired to adopt. By the time she finished, the applause filled the room like a wave. That night, James invited a small circle of friends to Jeppe and Maria's restaurant for a private celebration. Laughter and warm voices filled the room until James stood and tapped his glass. The sound drew every eye to him. 6 months ago, I met a woman who changed the way I saw my own life, he said. She was unafraid to challenge me to tell me the truth, even when it was hard. And she reminded me that the best connections are the ones built on honesty, not appearances. Emma felt heat rush to her cheeks as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. She knew instantly what it meant. Her pulse roared in her ears as he dropped to one knee. Emma, Chen, will you marry me? He asked, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. She looked at him and saw not the billionaire the headlines had built, but the man who had shown up at her door that night, and unknowingly started unraveling the walls around her. Yes, she said, her voice low at first, then stronger. Yes, I will. The room erupted in cheers. Maria clapped her hands and Jeppe hugged James so hard, the ring box almost fell from his hand. James slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that felt like the sealing of a pact. 6 months later, under the warm Tuscan sun, Emma stood in a small chapel surrounded by their closest friends and family. No paparazzi, no reporters, just the people who mattered. Rachel straightened her veil while Maria fussed with the bouquet. As she walked down the aisle, James's face lit up the way it always did when he saw her, and she thought of how strange and beautiful their beginning had been. She had hired an escort for one night to protect her image and found instead a man who would become her partner in every way. Their story had begun with a lie, but it was being written now in the clearest truth she had ever known, and she stepped toward him, certain that whatever came next, they would face it together.